Hello everybody, welcome back, and this is the third part of perception lecture video. Alright guys, as we learned that perception is actually complicated, we will now take a look on why designing a perceiving machine is not easy. So designing a computer vision system that can actually perceive the environment and recognize object and scene is more complicated than making a Star Wars movie. So in the 1950s, when digital computers become available to researchers, it was thought that it would take perhaps a decade to design a machine vision system that would rival human vision. But the early systems were primitive and took minutes of calculation to identify simple isolated objects that a young child could name in seconds. So perceiving objects and scenes was, the researchers realized, still the stuff of science fiction until now. Let's think about this. As you notice from this picture, you may pay a close attention to part A, B, C, and D in this shadowed picture of buildings. And then try to determine what area is in the dark part of A. And then try to think whether part A and C are facing the same direction. And then are part B and C is in the same building. And then is the building of D extending behind A? For us human, it may not be so complicated to examine the picture and answer those questions. However, perception is more difficult for computer vision system. So let's see from this example as well. To distinguish these three round objects is actually difficult to machine. Computer vision programs experience confusion in recognizing this picture. So the image of lens cover and the top of the picture are incorrectly classified as tennis ball by the machine or the computer. So why then perceiving machine is not easily recognized or perceiving objects? The first reason is the stimulus on the receptor is actually ambiguous, right? So when you look at the page of the your computer or laptop screen, the image cast by the border of the screen on your retina is actually ambiguous. It may seem strange to say that because first, the rectangular shape of the screen is obvious. And then second, once we know the screen shape and its distance from the eye, determining its image on the retina is a simple geometry problem, which as shown in this figure can be solved by extending rays from the corner of the screen in red into the eye. But the perceptual system is not concerned with determining an object's image on the retina. It starts with the image on the retina and its job to determine what object out there created the image, right? And the task of determining the object responsible for a particular image on the retina is called the inverse projection problem, because it involves starting with the retinal image and extending rays out from the eye. When we do this, as shown by extending the lines in this figure out from the eye, we see that the retinal image created by the rectangular page could have also been created by a number of other objects, including a tilted trapezoid, a much larger rectangle, or an infinite number of other objects located at different distance. So when we consider that a particular image on the retina can be created by many different objects in their environment, it is easy to see why we say that the image on the retina is ambiguous. Nonetheless, humans typically solve this inverse projection problem easily, even though it still poses a serious challenge to computer vision system. And this problem of hidden objects also makes computer vision system is difficult to make. So hidden object occurs anytime one object obscure part of another object, right? And this occurs frequently in the environment. But people may easily understand that the part of an object that is covered continues to exist. And they're able to use their knowledge of the environment to determine what is likely to be present. All right, so can you guess this on this messy desk? Can you find hidden pencil? It's an easy one. And can you find the outdoor glasses? It's kind of difficult, but I believe that you can easily find it. But still, this is very, very challenging for computer vision system to find hidden objects. And next, people are also able to recognize objects that are not in sharp focus, such as faces in these figures. See, look at this picture and see how many of these people you can identify. So despite the degraded nature of this image, people can often identify most of them, whereas computers perform poorly on this task. I believe like within half minutes, you're able to recognize these blurred faces easily. All right, another problem facing any perceiving machine is that objects are often viewed from different angles. So their images are continually changing, as you can see in this figure. So people's ability to recognize an object even when it's seen from different viewpoints is called viewpoint invariance. So computer vision system can achieve viewpoint invariance only by a laborious process that involves complex calculation designed to determine which point of an object match in different views. And then the next reason is moving from objects to scene adds another level of complexity. Not only there are often many objects in a scene, but there may be providing information about the scene that requires some reasoning to figure out. Consider for this example, this picture, the airplane picture. What is the basis for deciding the planes are probably on display at an air shows? So one answer is knowing that the plane is on the right is an older looking military plane, yeah, that is most likely no longer in service. We also know that the people aren't passengers there waiting to board because they are walking on the grass and aren't carrying any luggage, right? So cues like this, although obvious to a person like us, would need to be programmed into a computer. So the difficulties facing any perceiving machine illustrate that the process of perception is more complex than it seems. It's not easy for machine because they have to be like further programmed, but it is likely easy for a human because we have that built-in vision systems. All right, moving forward, our discussion will be changed to the perception and action that create behavior. And we will now consider how then movement help us to perceive and how action and perception interact to each other. So although movement add complexities to perception that isn't there when we are sitting in one place, movement also help us perceive objects in the environment more accurately. So one reason this occurs is that moving reveals aspects of objects that are not apparent from a single viewpoint. For example, let's consider these horses in this figure. From one point, this object looks like a metal sculpture of a fairly normal horse in the figure A. However, walking around the horse reveals that it isn't as normal as it first appeared. So you can see in the figure B and C, yeah, that's why seeing an object from different viewpoints provides added information that results in more accurate perception, especially for objects that are out of the ordinary, such as this distorted horse. And movement is also important because of the coordination that is continually occurring between perceiving stimuli and taking action toward this stimuli. So consider this example, what happens when someone reaching out to pick up the cup, a cup of coffee in this A figure, and then she first will be identifying the coffee cup, right, among the flowers and other objects on the table. Once the coffee cup is perceived by this person, she will reaches for it and taking into account its location on the table, as you can see in this B figure. As she reaches the coffee cup, avoiding the flower, she positions her fingers to grasp the cup, taking into account her perception of the cup's handle, as you can see in this figure C. Then she lifts the cup, which is the right amount of force, taking into account her estimate of how heavy the cup is based on her perception of its fullness of coffee. This simple action requires continually perceiving the position of the cup and of her hands and fingers relative to the cup, while calibrating her action in order to accurately grasp the cup and then pick it up without spilling any coffee. And all this just to pick up a cup of coffee. What's amazing about it is about this sequence is that it happened almost automatically, right? Even though we're not thinking about it, it's automatically, we do it every day. We do it effortlessly. But as with everything else about perception, this ease and apparent simplicity are achieved with the aid of complex underlying mechanism. So we will now describe the physiology behind this mechanism. And the detail of the link between perception and action have become clearer as a result of physiological research that began in 1980s. Yeah, so this research has shown that there are two processing streams in our brain. One involved with perceiving object, and the other involved with locating and taking action toward this object. And this physiological research involves two methods. One is the brain ablation, is the study of the effect of removing part of the brain in animals, and the neuropsychology, or the study of behavior of people with brain damage. Both of these methods have demonstrated how studying the function of animal and human with brain damage can reveal important principles about the function of the normal or intact brain. So as you can see in this figure, this is the classic experiment done by Ungerleider and Michigan in 1982. They studied removing part of monkey's brain. It will affect its ability to identify an object and to determine the object location. And this experiment used a technique called brain ablation, as I mentioned before, which is removing part of the brain of the monkey. So Ungerleider and Mishkin presented monkeys with two tasks, as you can see here, the object discrimination and landmark discrimination. So in the object discrimination problem, a monkey was shown one object, such as a rectangular solid, yeah, and was then presented with two choice tasks like the one shown in the A figure, yeah, which included the target object or the rectangular solid, yeah. So if the monkey pushed aside the target object, it received the food reward that was hidden in a well under the object. And the landmark discrimination problem is, you can see in this B part. So here the tall cylinder is the landmark, which indicates the food well that contains food. So the monkey received food if it removed the food well cover closer to the tall cylinder. So in the ablation part of the experiment, part of the temporal lobe was removed in some monkeys. As you can see, the temporal lobe is in the lower part of the brain here. And behavioral testing showed that the object discrimination problem became very difficult for the monkeys when their temporal lobes were removed. And this result indicates that the neural pathway that reaches the temporal lobes is responsible for determining an object's identity. Then the researcher therefore called the pathway leading from the striate cortex to the temporal lobe the what pathway, as you can see in this figure. So the what pathway, or the perception pathway, is the temporal lobe leading from the striate cortex to the temporal lobe. Other monkeys which had their parietal lobe removed, parietal lobe is the areas of the brain in this location, they had difficulty solving the landmark discrimination problem. And this result indicates that the pathway that leads to the parietal lobe is responsible for determining an object location. So Unger-Leder and Mishkin therefore called the pathway leading from the striate cortex to the parietal lobe is the where pathway, or the action pathway. So the what and where pathways are also called the ventral pathway and the dorsal pathway. Moving forward to Milner and Goodell experiments in 1995, they used neuropsychological approaches to reveal two streams, one involving the temporal lobe and the other involving the parietal lobe. So the researchers studied a patient called TF, a 34-year-old woman who suffered damage to her temporal lobe from carbon monoxide poisoning caused by a gas leak in her home. Yeah, poor woman. But then one result of the brain damage was revealed when DF was asked to rotate a card held in her hand to match different orientation of a slot, as you can see in this A part. She was unable to do this. Yeah, and perfect matching performance would be indicated by but DF responses are actually like really scattered, yeah, as you can see in this left figure in the B part, yeah. Each line indicates how DF adjusted to card orientation, and see like many times failed, and the right circle here is actually shows the accurate performance of the normal controls. So because DF had trouble rotating a card to match the orientation of the slot, it will seem reasonable that she would also have trouble placing the card through the slot, because to do this, she would have to turn the card so that it was lined up with the slot. But surprisingly, when DF was asked to mail the card through the slot, yeah, she could do this. So even though DF could not turn the card to match the slot orientation, once she started moving the card toward the slot, she was able to rotate it to match the orientation of the slot. Thus, DF performed poorly in the static orientation matching task, but did well as soon as action was involved. So the researcher then interpreted that DF's behavior as showing that there is one mechanism for judging orientation and another one for coordinating vision and action. So based on these results, the researchers suggested that the pathway from the visual cortex to the temporal lobe be called the perception pathway, and the pathway from the visual cortex to the parietal lobe be called as the action pathway, also called to how pathway because it also associated with how the person takes action. So the perception pathway corresponds to the what pathway we described in conjunction with the monkey's experiments, right? And the action pathway corresponds to the where pathway. Those, some researchers refer to what and where pathway and some of the perception and action pathways. So, but whatever the terminology, the research shows that perception and action are processes in two separated pathways in the brain. All right. Moving to our last discussion is related to mirror neuron. So in 1992, researchers were investigating how neurons in the monkey's premotor cortex is fired as the monkey performs an action like picking up a piece of food. Okay, and this in the B figure part shows how a neuron responded when the monkey picked up food from a tray and result is a result the experimenters had expected. But as sometimes happen in science, they observed something they didn't expect. When one of the experimenters picked up a piece of food while the monkey was watching, the same neuron also fired, as you can see in the C part of the picture. What was so unexpected was that the neuron that fired to observing the experimenter pick up the food were the same ones that had fired earlier when the monkey had picked up the food by themselves. This initial observation, then followed by many additional experiments after that, led to the discovery of mirror neurons, or the neurons that respond both when a monkey observes someone else grasping an object such as food on the tray and when the monkey itself grasps the food. So they called mirror neurons because the neuron response to watching the experimenter grabs an object is similar to the response that would occur if the monkey were performing the same action. So although you might think that the monkey may have been responding to the anticipation of receiving food, the type of object made little difference. So the neurons responded just as well as the monkey observed the experimenter pick up an object that was not the food. At this point, you might be wondering whether mirror neurons are present in human brains, right? And some researchers also been done with human, and it suggests that our brains also contains this kind of mirror neurons. For example, researchers who were using electrodes to record the brain activity in people with epilepsy in order to determine which part of the brain was generating their seizures have recorded activity from neurons with the same mirror properties as those identified in monkeys. And additional work done using fMRI in neurologically normal people has further suggested that these neurons are distributed throughout the brain in a network that has been called a mirror neuron system. So what is the purpose of these mirror neurons? One suggestion is that they are involved in determining the goal or intention behind an action. And the exact function of mirror neurons in human actually are still being debatable, yeah, with some researchers also assigning mirror neuron as a central place in determining intention and other questioning this idea as well. So mirror neuron is still kind of like debatable topic in perception. But whatever the exact role of mirror neurons in humans, there is no question that there is some mechanism that extend the role of perception beyond providing information that enable us to take action to yet another role in varying why people are doing what they are doing. Very interesting. And this is the end of perception topic video. Thank you so much for your attention and take care and see you soon.